I have to say, the Fallout community is incredibly creative, and it continues to impress me time and time again. Because Bethesda made the Creation Kit modding tools freely available to the wider public, players like me have a never-ending parade of novel ways to enjoy Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, and Fallout 4. Not only do these talented modders keep the games feeling fresh by implementing modern features, such as being able to aim down sights and sprinting, but they're also creating new things to play around with, armor to wear, weapons to wield, and companions to travel with. Lord knows I love a good modded companion. Modders have even created entirely new quests and adventures for you to go on. Most of the time, these kinds of adventures only take about an hour or two to complete. A little bite-sized adventure you can knock out in an afternoon. Other adventures can be significantly bigger, taking place in entirely new world spaces, and they're more comparable in size to DLC. But then, there's the big projects, the complete overhauls as they're called, where it's basically an entirely new game made within an existing Fallout engine. These things are unusually massive in scale, which unfortunately means that most of them don't make it to completion. It's a lot of work for what is likely to be a relatively small modding team. So when one of these projects actually does get released, it's nothing short of a small miracle. I have played a handful of these overhaul mods in my time. Fallout New California and Fallout the Frontier are the ones that immediately come to my mind. Both of them were incredible overhaul mods for Fallout New Vegas. And I was impressed to see what fans could make, driven by their passion to tell a unique story within the Fallout universe. They certainly had their flaws though. As impressive as they were, you could tell that they were fan-driven projects because there were some glaring issues that couldn't be ignored. Fallout New California suffered from a lack of development resources, so although the first few hours are very polished, the rest of the experience feels underdeveloped. Fallout the Frontier was even more ambitious and was jammed with just so many amazing things. But the main quest line was plagued by terrible writing, plagiarism, and just really frustrating gameplay segments. It was so bad that it overshadowed the entire rest of the game, and Fallout the Frontier is largely just known these days by its awful main quest that was filled with honestly terrible design choices. But again, these are unofficial, fan-made Fallout games. You have to cut them some slack because projects like this are always going to be held back by their limitations. Because how could an unofficial game, made by inexperienced but passionate fans, with a total budget of basically nothing, ever rival an official product? I don't know how, but Fallout London somehow completely defies this logic. It is another unofficial, complete overhaul mod, this time for Fallout 4. And after having spent dozens of hours in it, I can say that this fan-made game is good enough to be considered an official Fallout game. Seriously, if Bethesda themselves had been the ones to release it, if they packaged it up and put it out on store shelves and digital marketplaces, it would have been welcomed into the official canon alongside Fallout 3, Fallout 4, and New Vegas. The gameplay is smooth, the voice acting and voice direction are top tier, and there are numerous quests to go on and things to see. It's just a really good experience. That's not to say that I don't have critiques or criticisms. Subjectively, there are some design choices I don't like, and some parts I think could have used a bit more polish or revisioning. But I must give credit where credit is due. Of all the mods that I have played, this is the one that most closely resembles an official, authentic Fallout experience. And that is an incredible achievement, something that I hope everybody on the development team can take pride in. They have worked incredibly hard, and their efforts shine through. I can see how much care was put into this project. If I had to give a one-sentence review of Fallout London, it would probably be this. If you enjoyed Fallout 4, you'll probably enjoy Fallout London as well. In fact, if I were to be incredibly reductive, I would say that Fallout London is simply more Fallout 4, and doesn't stray too far from the established formulas of its predecessor. Many of the strengths of Fallout 4 are present: the exploration, the weapon and armor crafting, interesting factions, and fun combat. But it also shares many of the same weaknesses: the glitches, lackluster lighting, and dated combat. But if I wanted to be a bit more generous with my assessment of this game, I might say that Fallout London is kind of like the Fallout New Vegas of Fallout 4. Because much like Fallout New Vegas, Fallout London builds upon the established framework of its predecessor, while also making some noteworthy improvements. Let's start off by talking about the most impressive aspect of Fallout London, in my opinion, which has to be just how much new stuff there is. Because this is an unofficial fan-made game, everyone would have understood if they reused some of the assets from Fallout 4. But they didn't. Every single piece of this game feels new. Many of the staples of the franchise that we have seen time and time again are simply absent. There's no super mutants, Brotherhood of Steel, no Vault-Tec vaults or Deathclaws, and honestly that's a relief, as many of these factions and enemies have been overutilized by the franchise to the point of nausea. It is so refreshing to see new factions and new enemies taking their place. But it's not just new factions and enemies, it's also everything. New food, new drinks, new robots, new flora and fauna, weapons, armor, vehicles, music, corporations, and architecture. The modders really went all out to give this game its own unique identity, and so much of it is unapologetically British, from the foods to the accents of the people you meet to all of the recognizable landmarks like Big Ben, Buckingham Palace, and London Bridge. In fact, while I was playing this game, I started to become more familiar with British culture and landmarks. Since this game takes place in Fallout London, as the name would imply, I now know that London has a famous Ferris wheel called the London Eye. And I learned that the city of London is settled on a river known as the Thames. And I also know that that bridge isn't London Bridge, but is actually called Tower Bridge, and the actual London Bridge is significantly more boring. But I didn't know that. I'm willing to bet a lot of people didn't know that. And there are so many cultural references everywhere. James Bond, Doctor Who, the Beatles, Wallace and Gromit, Shakespeare, the Cocking Wombles. There were probably even a few more references I just didn't get because I'm ignorant of British culture. But all of these things taken together as a whole really emphasizes that you are no longer in America. This is London, the United Kingdom. Rule Britannia! Even the user interface got a makeover. Because the fictional Vault-Tec Corporation doesn't operate in England, none of the classic Pip-Boy icons return. Every single one of them has been replaced with a new one, and each and every one of them is fully animated. And I must repeat myself that this is a fan-made game. People would not have been upset if the vanilla assets were simply reused here. Nobody would have minded. We would have looked the other way if you took a shortcut. But they went all out to make this game have a unique feel, and those efforts are on full display. And having all of these new things to find, new locations to visit, new gear to acquire, new enemies to fight, they all reinforce the primary gameplay loop carried over from Fallout 4. To go out, fight some enemies, complete a few quests, and use the spoils of your labor to craft and upgrade new gear or buy more ammo. And once you're done with that, you get to go back out there with all your updated gear and explore more dangerous areas. And Fallout London gives you plenty to explore, let me tell you. The game world is absolutely packed. Hundreds of locations are scattered all throughout the city of London for you to find. Sometimes it's something small, like a little laundromat. You go in there and there's not a whole lot going on. But other times, you find a place that is jaw-droppingly impressive, like the British Museum or a beautiful, spacious cathedral. There is something new around every corner. even going into an otherwise unremarkable location could net you some unique gear, like a collectible coaster or magazine that'll boost your stats, or a mysterious cute Cthulhu doll, the purpose of which becomes more apparent as you gather more of them. Or maybe you'll find a vinyl record that you can bring back to your main base and listen to a new classic song. And if you decide to go underground, you'll find a fully functioning, complex metro system that can shuttle you around the map. Everywhere you go, there's something cool. And if the main map wasn't big enough for you, if all of that just wasn't enough, there's also several additional boroughs on the outskirts of London for you to explore, like little DLCs that are already pre-packaged with Fallout London. There's Camden, Islington, Westminster, and Hackney. Each of these boroughs have their own faction, landmarks, their own dungeon-like areas to explore. It's really hard to properly convey just how stuffed to the brim this game is. I have tried my hardest to see everything that the game has to offer, but that well does not run dry. There's always more. It's like trying to explore every cave in Skyrim. You just can't do it. But not everywhere you go and everything you do is going to be the most exciting thing. Something that I dislike about these kinds of games is that there's often too many low-effort quests. You know the ones I'm talking about. The one where somebody says, go to location X, kill all the enemies there, and bring me doohickey Y. And then you bring it back, and they give you 200 caps, or whatever the currency is. It's just busy work, and it doesn't feel like my time is being respected. This was particularly egregious with Fallout 4 and its infinitely repeating Radiant quests. Thankfully, Fallout London doesn't approach that level of mundane nonsense. But again, there are still some quests where it's just, go over here and grab me some supplies, or some clothing, or a missing guitar. And the quest doesn't take you anywhere particularly interesting, and there's not much of a payoff. And I know this is personal preference, but another criticism that I have is that there's just too much combat. There are too many enemies for my liking. And I know not everyone will agree. This game gives you a lot of fun weapons to play with, a lot of cool guns and melee implements, so of course, there's going to be a lot of things for you to use those weapons on. But I just found it very repetitive how every location seemed to have hostile hooligans, hostile cultists, hostile cannibals, hostile pirates, hostile robots, hostile animals. I suppose my frustration comes from the fact that I often don't have a choice in how I resolve a quest. It always seems to require lots of murder. And I don't mind doing that, I just wish it wasn't required of me. I wish I had options. Case in point, one of the quests that I did required me to put on a disguise and infiltrate a rival faction to sabotage it from the inside. But that disguise only worked for that one specific quest, and once I finished that quest, it stopped working as a disguise. And I wish I could have kept using that as a disguise, because avoiding combat is sometimes kind of nice. Because what I personally enjoy from Fallout games is the role-playing aspect, which is why Fallout New Vegas is still my favorite one. So what about the role-playing elements? How does Fallout London compare? For all the improvements Fallout 4 made to the series in terms of gunplay and crafting systems, it really fell short with regard to giving the player the ability to roleplay. The dialogue system was streamlined and slimmed down. It severely restricted how you could interact with people. It felt less like you were having a natural conversation, and more like you were just watching a conversation scene play out with minimal input. There was also a limited number of dialogue options, no more than 4, and there was also a distinct lack of any kind of speech check or skill check. No new options opened up based on your character build, except for the occasional charisma check, which let you barter for more money. A player with a high level of intelligence will have the same options as a player with low intelligence. Same for luck, perception, perks like Cannibal or Lady Killer. No matter how you built your character or what perks you took, you didn't really get a whole lot of new options. All of these things taken together means that each player will have the game play out in a very similar way and not feel custom tailor-made based on their choices and attributes. It's not just the dialogue system either. Very few quests allowed you to deviate from the prescribed path, regardless of your skill set or personal choice. Sure, there were some quests where you could suddenly backstab the person you've been helping, but most of the time, the quests tended to play out in exactly one way. It also does not help that the game had a lot of repeatable Radiant quests, which are the absolutely least interesting kind of quests you could possibly have. The lack of good quests and role-playing is why you sometimes hear people describe Fallout 4 as being a good game, but a bad role-playing game. Or, in some people's eyes, a bad Fallout game. Because for people who find RPG elements intrinsic to the Fallout experience, their absence in Fallout 4 was disappointing. So the question is, how many of these problems repeat in Fallout London? And I'm proud to report that the dialogue system is significantly improved. Changes have been made to the interface, and you are no longer strictly limited to only 4 speech choices. Sometimes you have more, and sometimes you have less. There was also the reintegration of skill checks. Throughout my time in Fallout London, I had so many skill checks and speech checks, and even perk checks come up. They are common. You will find them everywhere. Your character build will unlock new dialogue constantly, and sometimes it'll even let you bypass an objective because you had a useful skill. There's even the option to select speech failures again, just like with Fallout New Vegas. And some of those speech failures are pretty funny. I really do find these kinds of skill checks invaluable, because it means that not every player will play the game the exact same way. Some will have to find a different route to make up for their lack in certain skills. It feels like the game is being customized, and that's, to me, the merit of a good role-playing game. However, despite this, it often felt like the choices I was making weren't having much of an impact. Like there weren't very many consequences if I performed suboptimally or excessively violently. It often felt like there was just one ending to any given quest, and my input was rather minimal. I feel like this sentiment was buoyed by the fact that there are a lot of quests in the game, and yes, many of them only have one real ending, so it can feel like they all just don't have much impact. But that's not always the case. And sometimes the way you have completed a quest, or your decision whether or not to complete the quest in the first place, does have lingering consequences. I saw this firsthand with the Gang War quest line, which has multiple routes near the end, and the player's prior actions are remembered by certain gang members, which can affect which ending you get. But that's more of an exception than the rule. Most other factions in this game don't have nearly as much work for you, and some even only have a single quest or two. Even if this game had some kind of reputation system, you're never around any given faction long enough for your actions to matter much. So it really does not matter if you are rude to them or you completed their quests suboptimally, because you'll most likely never see them again, and the other factions will not hear about it. Another minor nitpick I have is the inconsistent use of unkillable NPCs. New Vegas set a high bar by having nearly every character be killable at any time, while Fallout 4 was a lot more restrictive and prevented some NPCs from being killed if they were deemed to be too important to the story. Fallout London kinda has the worst of both worlds in this regard. Some NPCs are unkillable, even if I really want them to die. Gaunt. Meanwhile, there are instances where I would kill a random person out in the wasteland and then be notified that that person was somehow tied to a bigger faction, and now that I killed that person, I can't work with that faction anymore. I pissed off a faction I didn't even know existed by killing a person that was apparently tied to it. I killed a load-bearing NPC. Again, this is more of a minor nitpick, I just reloaded from an earlier save, but it was always kind of annoying when that happened. Anyway, the bottom line here is that Fallout London has made some strong changes to the role-playing system, and it implemented a lot of features that Fallout 4 lacked. There feels like a lot more player agency and more opportunities to express yourself and your unique character build. I just wish that your choices had more consequences. So now that we've talked about the gameplay and the world space, let's talk about the story. Okay, I'm going to be a bit mean for a bit. I think the main story in this game is pretty weak. It's serviceable enough to get you across the finish line, but it's not very compelling. One of your very first objectives is to confront the mysterious Smythe. It's also your last objective. Finding Smythe is your main focus from start to finish. It's just one long game of cat and mouse where Smythe is always 2 steps ahead of you. And I gotta say, not having the main story objective progress in any meaningful way for the entirety of the game is certainly a choice. But let me back up a little bit. The game starts off strong enough, with a riveting escape from a laboratory test tube. How did you get there? Well, you'll find that out later. For now, it's time to leave. And this is a fun and exciting way to allow the player to get familiar with the controls and combat, and it introduces important characters. At the end of this tutorial area, you get a very scenic view of the world you will soon be exploring. It's quite nice. And once you're out of the lab and you start walking around, you meet some local gang members that'll give you directions, and they'll also give you a big fat lore dump. It's a fairly inelegant way to explain the different factions, but it does fill the void of silence as they escort you to their main base. I don't think it would be so bad if there was an opportunity to follow up on this later, you know? Once we get to their base, maybe we sit down, have a more detailed conversation. I could ask some questions about these different factions. But no, it's just a big fat lore dump, and then you move on. At least that's what I was going to say, until they updated the game to version 1.03 and added new characters, including one that specifically addresses this one criticism I had, so I guess this problem's fixed now. Thanks. Thanks for fixing the issue I had with your mod in real time as I'm writing this. Anyway, helping these gang members out, it's an optional side quest, so if you want you can just leave and never talk to them again. To continue the main quest, they direct you towards a different group that might be able to help you learn more about that mysterious laboratory where you were birthed. That group of people will send you to a man called the Ferryman. The Ferryman will send you to a kid named Archie. Archie will lead you to St. Paul's Cathedral. The bishop there will point you towards a missing resident, Lazarus. And Lazarus will show you the entrance to the underground Angel Station. Along the way, you'll meet some interesting people, see some amazing environments and locations, and have plenty of opportunities to stumble upon smaller factions, independent settlements, or random encounters. Truthfully, I liked the first act of Fallout London. I think the first act is very strong. And the big battle at the end, in the Angel Underground Station, it's thrilling. A lot of the new enemies you encounter look very unique and very messed up. But as I mentioned before, once you get down there, Smythe is 2 steps ahead of you, and escapes before you can reach him, leading into Act 2. In Act 2, Smythe invites you to meet them at Big Ben in the Westminster Borough. But to be granted entry, you'll need to collect signatures from the leaders of 4 other factions from the other boroughs. This is a bizarre request. I suppose it's supposed to emphasize the gentry's steadfast adherence to bureaucracy, so it makes sense thematically, but it's still a ridiculous requirement, especially because one of the people you're supposed to get a signature from is borderline illiterate and has never signed anything before, so what are the guards comparing his signature to confirm it's legit? My only options are to go around gathering all these signatures, or find somebody who can forge signatures. I'm glad I have multiple options, but honestly, the whole notion is still very absurd. At least from a narrative standpoint. I understand it's really just a flimsy excuse to force the player to go meet a wide variety of side factions and explore a bunch of cool new locations. That's honestly understandable. The developers made a lot of cool things, and they want you to go see them. So I'm happy to do that. I still think the premise behind this is a bit silly. So you go meet one of the new factions, and you ask them for a signature, and they'll say, sure, I'll sign that paperwork, but first you have to do a couple quests for me. So you do quests for them, they sign your paperwork, and then you move on to the next faction. Exciting, isn't it? Anyway, once you've collected, or forged, enough signatures, you finally get permission to enter. Big Ben is right there. But they tell you that you have to use a backdoor entrance. And this is where things start getting a little bonkers. The rest of Act 2 feels like a cacophony of random chaos, if I'm being brutally honest. As it turns out, the back door you were led to was actually a trap. You are brought down a long, ridiculous conveyor belt, but instead of being murdered, you get dropped in a jail cell. Before you even have time to fully process what just happened, you'll notice that there is a trooper standing over you, one of Smythe's soldiers. The trooper tells you that he's willing to betray Smythe, and that you need to go meet his contact, Mr. X. So you break free of the prison, kill a bunch of masked weirdos, walk out the police station, the police don't care for whatever reason, and make your way to Mr. X. Mr. X informs you that Smythe has decided to leave Big Ben and is currently attending a Renaissance fair for some reason. And the best way to kill Smythe is to bomb the viewing box in the stadium. So you go there, you plant explosives, you blow up the tower, but plot twist, that was all a setup. Smythe wasn't there at all. Immediately after this explosion, and I mean immediately, Smythe starts broadcasting a message that basically declares martial law and seizes power. That's right, somehow blowing up a random spectator box serves as their Reichstag fire to go full dictator. Now you may be wondering why Smythe needed your help to stage a false flag terrorist attack to consolidate power, when they have a vast amount of resources under their command, including a bunch of underground masked weirdos and dozens, if not hundreds, of clone soldiers. I do not have an answer for you, but that is the end of Act 2. And as snarky and condescending as I just was, I wanted to emphasize that these missions aren't badly designed. It's fun to break out of prison. Making your way to Mr. X is a lot of fun because you have to fight your way through a science museum. And there is a lot of joy to be found in committing acts of domestic terrorism. But this all seems very rushed. You get hit with plot twist after plot twist, and it all happens so fast that it makes your head spin. Before we move on to the final act of the game, let's talk about all the different factions you can find and work with. The first factions you meet, and the ones who take up a majority of the first act of the game, are the Vagabonds and the Isle of Dogs. Two rival gangs that are currently engaged in a turf war. Now, when I first heard about this turf war, I thought that I would have the opportunity to do quests for both of them, and then ultimately decide which one I wanted to side with. I was incorrect, because you can only really join the Vagabonds and do quests for them. The Isle of Dogs, they don't really have a quest line, and joining up with them isn't really an option, which was a little lame to learn. Nevertheless, I felt like the Vagabond faction was probably one of the strongest side factions in the game. They've got a lot of fun quests for you to do, and a lot of lovable characters. And Gaunt. I liked how sometimes I would be given a specific assignment, but other gang members would give me optional bonus tasks to complete at my discretion. And I liked how my actions changed how that turf war ultimately played out, and how my choices affected the fates of the people involved. Overall, it's just a really, really well done faction questline. Another early game minor faction would be the Thames folk of Thameshaven. This is a brand new race of mutants who mostly live in the sewers. And I like them, even if they all sound like they need a lozenge. Although their constant wheezing does get obnoxious, they're only a minor faction, so they don't overstay their welcome. They've got a fun handful of quests for you, even if it's all largely irrelevant to what's happening on the surface world. Most of these are simple tasks. Get Greg some beer, get Jordan a pizza, get Ellen some clothes. But a couple of them are more involved, like trying to secure the future of the community by investigating a few missing person incidents. Overall, it's a decent bunch of people relaxing in a pretty unique looking location. As you continue to play the game, you'll inevitably meet more minor factions. The Pistols, the Roundels, the Bricktonians, Eastminster, Miller's Men, and I was going to spend some time talking about each one, but I don't think there's much of a point, because I would mostly just be repeating what I said about the Thames folk. It's a small group of interesting people that mostly keep to themselves. They've got a handful of small errands you can run, and one or two bigger quests. You go to their headquarters, talk to a few people, do some work for them. That work has little influence on the rest of the game, and then you move on. I'm probably coming off as overly dismissive, but that's just what they are. Somebody on the development team had a cool idea for a faction, and then they put it into the game, and now you can go meet that faction. It's not a bad thing by any means, but they do feel somewhat disconnected from the rest of the game's narrative. Working with these groups is usually optional, as there are some skill checks in the game that let you skip them. And like I mentioned earlier, there is the option to forge their signatures and not bother working with them at all. But it's at least worth taking the time to go meet them. The Pistols in particular have a really cool headquarters, and a couple of really good quests. Two more factions that you encounter as you make your way across London are the Tommies, a military group that keeps the peace, and the aristocracy they protect in Westminster, known as the Gentry. You get the opportunity to do quests for both of these factions, although these groups feel a lot more decentralized. It feels less like you're doing faction quests for a specific faction, and more like you're doing side quests for individual people. And it makes a lot of sense. After all, the Gentry and the Tommies already control the city of London. They don't really need your help with that. But they might know of a nearby hooligan gang you could help them clear out. They would appreciate that. Then comes the final act of the game, and you have to choose which major faction you'd like to work with. The Fifth Column, or the Knights of Camelot. These factions are presented as the biggest players in the Wasteland, each one powerful enough to challenge the Gentry for control of London. But for as mighty as they're supposed to be, their presence throughout the rest of the world doesn't feel very significant. Before I started the third act, I honestly hadn't seen much from either faction. Hell, I barely knew of their existence. And now, with almost no knowledge of what either faction stood for or what their goals were, I was expected to pick one to rule London. In fact, I would say that the third act almost feels stapled on. The entire point of Act 2 is to gain entry to Big Ben to confront Smythe. But right before you're allowed in, you're booted out and you have to go work with a different faction and do their quest line. And once you've gone through all that, you end up right where you were, gaining entry to Big Ben to confront Smythe. And if you hadn't been forced to do this third act, you might never have known that these other two factions even exist. Sure, the occasional NPC talks about them, but they don't come up very often and you never see them. Much like all the other minor factions, they keep to themselves. They have no presence outside of their local area, and they don't really seem to be affecting the rest of the Wasteland at all. They also feel disconnected from the main story, which is something that can be overlooked for the minor factions, but really shouldn't be the case if these are supposed to be the big ones. You know how in Fallout New Vegas, you interacted with the Legion and the NCR constantly? Before you even got to Vegas, you saw them at Prim, the Mojave Outpost, Ranger Station Charlie, Nipton, Cottonwood Cove, Nelson. They were everywhere. Scouts and raiding parties attacking each other. Every single damn person would tell you how the war was affecting their life. That kind of world building is significantly missing from Fallout London when it comes to these two big factions. Part of me wonders if this was an intentional design choice. After all, this is a fan-made, modded project, and maybe they weren't sure how many resources they'd be able to commit. Maybe they'd get to Act 2 and realize that they've run out of steam and they needed to wrap it up quickly. In which case, they could just let you walk right in and deal with Smythe, and there would be no Act 3. It's just a theory, and it might not even be true, but it would explain why these two big factions don't really feel interconnected with the rest of the world. Design flaws aside, both the Knights of Camelot faction and the Fifth Column faction are interesting enough, and they've got good quests. And they both have you going out and interacting with the other minor factions, so they feel a bit more connected in that regard. For example, Camelot wants to secure cooperation with the Bricktonians, while the Fifth Column wants aid from Miller's men. As I said before, you don't tend to see either faction interacting with the others outside their little bubble, so it's nice to have these missions, and I would have liked to see more of the sort. Both of their quest lines are fairly linear and straightforward. They'll each give you a series of missions that will further their war effort, leading up to a lethal strike against the other major faction, and culminating with a final climactic battle against Smythe's army. If you like freedom and democracy, you side with the Knights of Camelot, and if you want to rule with an iron fist, you join the Fifth Column. If neither of these factions appeals to you, there's also a third option. You can actually join Smythe's army and work for Smythe. Instead of working to establish freedom or fascism, you can help them solidify their sole grasp over the city. You know, like a dictator.
I prefer the term autocrat.
Smythe will have you assassinate political enemies, do a few other things here and there, and then participate in a final battle against the other two factions. Once that's all done, you're finally allowed to meet Smythe face to face, and either kill them or agree to join them. Like the other two Endgame factions, this questline is linear and straightforward. The missions are fun, and sometimes there's a bit of flexibility in how you can handle an assignment. But whichever faction you decide to help, you eventually have to fight your way to the House of Parliament. Massive endgame firefights like these are difficult to pull off correctly. Sometimes there aren't enough enemies or visual spectacle, and it feels a bit unsatisfying, as is the case with Fallout New Vegas. But Fallout London missteps in the other direction, in my opinion, forcing you to personally kill over 100 enemies. I certainly found it to be a slog to complete. But once you finally make it to your destination, you are met with a shocking surprise. Every member of the House of Parliament looks like you. You're an MP! Which is to say, everyone here is a clone of each other, and so are you. And as you make your way past them and ascend the clock tower, you find yet another twist. Smythe looks exactly like you too. You've all been clones of each other the entire time. And maybe I'm crazy, but I feel like this was a fun twist. The visual spectacle of walking into the legislative chambers and seeing a whole bunch of variants of yourself, including a binhead, buckethead variant, that put a big goofy grin on my face. Plus, once you know this twist is coming on your second playthrough, you can make a pit stop over by the plastic surgeon and make them all look incredibly silly, including Smythe. But I can see how players who may want to take this a bit more seriously might not enjoy this sci-fi twist. However you decide to deal with Smythe, either by killing them in a one-on-one poison-tipped umbrella duel, or agreeing to spare their life, the game ends and the credits roll. But not before the endgame slideshow. Yes, this was something that Fallout 4 was sorely missing. An endgame narration that details how your actions have affected the wasteland and all the different people in it. It was really cool to have in Fallout New Vegas, so I'm glad Fallout London brings it back. It's a quick and easy way to show lasting consequences for everyone, even if it's only seen in a brief narrative snippet. So that was a bird's eye view of the entire main quest, along with most of the different factions of the game. As a whole, and despite some of my complaints, it's a solid experience. Each and every faction in the game will have some likable characters, some funny moments, and some fun quests. But what about the companions? Every good Fallout game needs some traveling partners, so what does Fallout London offer? First up, there's the obligatory dog companion. This time we've got a bulldog named Churchill, and it's basically a reskinned dog meat from Fallout 4. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially for players who prefer companions that don't talk constantly. And you can even put a little bowler hat on him, which is cute. Then we've got Arthur Mountbatten, former tax collector, Kira the treasure hunter, and Mad Jack the boxer. These are your typical Fallout 4 companions, doing typical Fallout 4 companion things. If you find them out there in the wasteland, it doesn't take too much to convince them to join you. After that, they'll assist you in combat, provide quippy comments about your enemies or the area, and express approval or disapproval about your actions. Each of them has a well-done personal quest you can go on once you've built up enough rapport with them. Kira's quest is lighthearted and fun, as she commissions your help to hunt down a legendary treasure, and along the way you have to contend with a rival treasure hunter, and there's some delightful back and forth banter. Just an all-around good time. Mountbatten has an excellent quest as well, though a bit more somber, as he fears he may not have much time left on this earth, and requests your help to complete his bucket list. As you help him, you learn a bit more about his pre-war past, and the whole thing wraps up in a very tender way. And then we have Mad Jack, who specializes in fisticuffs as opposed to firearms. His personal quest involves getting revenge on a list of people who've wronged him. And although it sounds like a simple premise, it actually showcases a more vulnerable side of the big lug, and you can't help but feel sympathetic once you learn more about him. So yeah, these three are probably my favorites of the lot. Then we've got John Smith, a companion that is exclusive to players working with the Fifth Column faction. His story is integrally tied to that of the Fifth Column, and anyone who sides with that faction is really missing out if they don't spend some time working with John. He's a great character, with a fun and touching companion quest, although I did find that one to be a bit buggy. Some of the doors didn't open properly, some of the audio logs wouldn't play correctly, maybe it was an issue on my end. But aside from that minor issue, and the fact that not every player will be able to have access to him, I'd say he's good, about on par with the others I've mentioned. Another decent companion is Archie the Street Urchin. You will inevitably cross paths with him as you progress the main story, and once he's properly recruited, he'll stick with you for as long as you'd like. He doesn't actually participate in fights though. As with most child characters in this game, he can't be killed, but he also flees from combat. You can't really depend on him in a firefight, although he might draw some fire away from you. What he lacks in fighting skills, he makes up for with the ability to hack doors and terminals, so he still provides some utility, especially for less perceptive or technically minded players. And he's got a good companion quest on top of it all. Still, the lack of combat skills and inability to wear most armors can be frustrating, and traveling with a companion who can't actually take damage can be a little immersion breaking, if that's something you care about. And finally, there's Pendragon the Robot. Much like how John Smith is exclusive to the Fifth Column, Pendragon is reserved for players who side with the Knights of Camelot. This robot does not have any dialogue, preferring instead to communicate with a series of beeps and hand gestures. Personally, I've never been much of a fan of humanoid companions that don't speak. It makes it near impossible to understand what they're trying to say to you unless you've got subtitles on. But Pendragon does have access to a variety of different hand gestures and pantomimes, so I didn't mind it so much this time around. In fact, I would say that because of all these different animations, Pendragon is probably my favorite of all the mute companions that I've seen in the Fallout series. At the same time, they're also probably the least developed companion in the game, lacking any kind of companion quest or narrative significance. It's basically a blank slate with slightly more personality than your average robot. If you choose to side with Camelot, and you're struggling with combat or just want a fun robot companion traveling with you, go ahead and pick them up. In conclusion, I liked pretty much every companion that was available. If I had to rank them, I'd put most of them in A tier, on par, or even better than some of Fallout 4's companions. Although Archie, Churchill, and Pendragon are probably getting bumped down a tier or two based on their limitations and lack of content. As I said earlier, your opinion on Fallout London will probably mirror your opinion on Fallout 4. And as somebody who's quite critical of Fallout 4, I certainly have my complaints. But the reason I keep comparing this game to the other official games in the franchise is because I am genuinely impressed by it. This is the best Fallout game we have received in a decade. It's bigger than New Vegas. It's more of an RPG than Fallout 4. And it's free to play for anybody who already owns a copy of Fallout 4 on PC. And it has post-launch support. There's a roadmap that they've been adhering to, steadily updating the game to add more content, more people to talk to, quests to do, weapons to play around with, a new companion, as well as fixing thousands of bugs and making changes based on player feedback. And yet, despite all this, somehow it's not a mainline entry in the series or even a spin-off game. It's a community project. It is fan fiction. But it is incredible. I'm not sure what else to say. It's just really, really, really good and fascinatingly well done. If you haven't played it yet and you have the opportunity, I would definitely encourage you to try it out. There are so many moments in this game that I haven't talked about simply because I don't want to spoil them. Finding them is part of the fun of playing a game like this. But also, there's stuff in the game that I just haven't found yet, especially because I haven't really played it since the latest update. Even going back to get footage for this review, I was stumbling upon new characters I hadn't met before because I had played before the last update, and now there were just more people to talk to. And I felt like I was going crazy because how could I have possibly overlooked you last time I was here? Oh, that's right, you're new stuff. It's crazy, I tell ya. It's just crazy. Anyway, yeah, I'm not sure what else to say. This has been a great experience. I liked playing this game a lot. I played it for quite some time, and I came away with a generally positive experience, and I think that everyone should enjoy it. Also, Team Folan, I know this is a stupid request, but I'd like a way to display all my different cigarette cards and collectibles. It's just a thing that I like to have, being able to display all the fun stuff I've collected. I had a lot of fun doing that with Fallout 4's Kitaros card collection mod, and yeah, I just like to have something like this in Fallout London.